All right, Elsa, are you ready to go?
All set.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody in this space so that we don't have a lot of background noise. After we're done, we'll unmute you so you can ask questions. We will have the option to raise your hand. Please wait until the end of the talks to ask questions, but you should now see a raise hand option that pops up in your menu. So if you do have questions, you can just push that button and we'll unmute you towards the end of the talk. If you ask prior, we'll probably just cancel, so you'll just have to raise your hand again as we get towards the end. As a reminder, please stay off the stage. If you accidentally end up on stage, we'll give you a warning. If you do it a second time, we'll just kick you from the room. And if it's a regular reoccurrence, we'll ban you from the conference for the rest of the day. So just please give the speakers respect throughout the conference. Thank you again for being here. This is all just an experiment. We thought it'd be fun to try to do something new. And so we're really happy to have everybody here and participate. For our first speaker today, we have Alyssa Miller. I am super excited to have Alyssa speak. We were both scheduled to speak at CyberCon, and we unfortunately had to cancel that. But her topic is largely on deepfakes and identity. And I thought, what a cool place to talk about identity in VR, where you can really be anybody that you want to. So everybody, please click those clap and heart emojis to welcome Alyssa.
All right, thank you. And I realized that actually kind of got a little wild. So hopefully we are where we need to be, and I need to get mouse control back. This is the first thing that's already a little weird about being here in Altspace. It's just remembering that I've got to keep a couple different things in a couple different places. So first of all, welcome. This is honestly, as Kano mentioned, this is like probably one of the most appropriate and also completely new experiences that I've been involved in. My name is Alyssa Miller. First of all, I'm a hacker and a researcher. So I've been working on computers my entire life. I can think back to when I was 12 and I bought my first computer and started hacking Prodigy through teaching myself basic programming, and I never saw it as a career up until about 15 years ago when I was asked to join a penetration testing team for a large financial services company. But it's something I've been doing all my life. Just really, computers have always been a part of who I am. I'm also an application security advocate. I work for a company called Snyk. We make software for developers to help them secure their application development. I'm an author and a blogger, currently working on a book to help guide people to developing their own careers in security and to navigate some of the gatekeeping and other issues we have in security. And then finally, I am the co-host of a podcast on ITSP Magazine called The Uncommon Journey. And so my co-hosts, we actually highlight a lot of the unique stories of how different people got themselves into security and bring those stories to the world. So today I want to take you on a journey. We are already on an interesting journey here. We're in Altspace VR. We're already playing with the limits of sight and sound, but I'm going to push that a little bit farther for you. Now, I don't know how many of you remember at some point in your life going into what we call a fun house, But I can think back to when I was a young kid, and I mean, I grew up in Wisconsin, middle of, Midwest, and up here, things are very popular in the Wisconsin Dells. And my parents took me to the Wisconsin Dells. They took me to this theme park, and it had this fun house. And I never understood why they called it a fun house, because for me, it was anything but fun. You go into this building, you walk around, there's all these different, optical illusions and things that try to mess with all your senses. And I would keep seeing where I thought I needed to go to get out of this house, only to learn that my eyes were playing tricks on me. I couldn't trust anything about my senses anymore. The very things that I used to perceive the world around me were lying to me. So what we're seeing today and how this applies to deepfakes is we've seen these attack vectors start to change and to move towards this element. So where we used to attack systems and then we started attacking the people. Deepfakes are now allowing us to start attacking people's very senses, which is a pretty inherent thing for all of us in terms of how we recognize the world around us. So when I talk about deepfakes, what do I really mean? Now, when I say deepfakes, a lot of people picture what you see in the lower right there. We think about videos that we've seen. The Steve Buscemi Golden Globes video is a pretty popular one. There's some other ones out there that you may have seen before. But deepfakes really refers to any audio, video, or even still images that are artificially created and very convincing because they're created using deep learning neural networks, hence the name deepfakes. Now, deepfakes kind of got their beginning first as a research project, as you would expect, but it did not take long in 2017 before the porn industry grabbed a hold of this, right? I mean, you think about where so much of the promising tech kind of gets its foothold, it seems to be in the porn industry. And sure enough, as deepfakes started to come out, these porn companies realized, well, hey, we can start putting celebrities' faces on the bodies of the women in our videos. And there are a number of websites that are dedicated to this. As it's gone along, you can now actually request, I guess for a price, what celebrity female you want to see. And some of them even do support celebrity males. But you can request who you want to see in that video. But then it moved on from that pretty quickly. And about the end of 2017, we started seeing people figure out that we could apply this to politics. And you see a couple of the more notable images and videos here that were generated using deepfakes. You may also be familiar with a video that was created by Jordan Peele, where it shows Barack Obama sitting and giving an address, and he's saying some less than complimentary things about Ben Carson and obviously the current president and some other folks. And I think that's when people started to wake up and realize that this was something that was possible. It was something that could create convincing tech, and people started to take notice of it and realize that from a election security perspective, this could be pretty concerning. But the threats go beyond politics. Social engineering, remember I mentioned that we can create pretty convincing audio with the same technology. And there was a case last year in the UK where we saw this come to light. The CEO of a large energy corporation in the UK was duped into transferring via wires 200 million euros to the attackers. Basically what they had done was they had deepfaked audio of the parent company's president instructing the CEO to make this wire transfer, and he fell for it. And so this is a real life demonstration of what the threat is in terms of social engineering and how this could be extremely effective in terms of social engineering attacks. Now, we mentioned the porn industry before, so of course another concept here is the idea of revenge porn. I work with a couple folks who are in different organizations that focus on revenge porn. And revenge porn up till now has typically been, hey, my partner shared this nude selfie, or they shared a video or whatever, and we've since broken up and I get angry and I share this to the world. And so what we're seeing now is the ability to create that same kind of revenge porn without having ever been shared a nude selfie or a video of that person in a sexual act. And so this starts to become something that's concerning, and a lot of these groups that work with victims of those crimes are very aware of this and ultimately very concerned with the possibilities. And we'll kind of talk some more about that later. But when we move into the business world, there's also concerns here. There's the concerns for extortion. Now, I've got the Jeff Bezos situation up here as an example. Obviously, that wasn't deepfake. Everything I've heard, Jeff Bezos has acknowledged the videos and images that were being used to extort him were real. But does it really need to be real? When that stuff hits the media, how long before you're able to reverse that message? And what damage could be done in the meantime? Damage to that corporation, damage to that marriage, all of those things that anyone who's out to extort money from us would typically hold against us, they can still do, because it is so difficult to debunk this information. And we're going to talk about that too. But the threats in business are even larger than that. So I present to you this idea of outsider trading. Now, that's just my term for it. But a lot of us probably understand what insider trading is. You have a person internal to the organization, has some insider knowledge of the inner workings, things that are happening that are going to cause changes in stock price, significant changes. So they may buy when they know that the stock is low and it's about to take a big leap because of some news that's coming, or they may go the opposite direction. They may know that something's coming that's going to cause stocks to drop, so they sell off before that happens. But consider this scenario. I've got my friend Elon Musk up here. Think about the scenario where Tesla is getting ready to launch their newest model. We'll say the Model Q. And the night before, Elon's all set to go up there on stage, and he's going to, smash windows with sledgehammers or whatever he's planning to do this time. That night before, a deep fake video surfaces of Elon Musk purportedly talking to a group of investors and sharing with them all the problems that are happening with the line and why the model is going to be delayed and information like that. Well, of course, the stock price then is going to drop. Markets open the next morning, that video is out there. Before Tesla's had a chance to respond, the stock prices are impacted. So now the attacker can easily buy up shares at a shorted price. News cycle catches up, says, all right, this was a deep fake. We get the word out there. Stocks recover. The launch goes fine, other than Elon probably breaks a few windows or something. And then we sell off that stock. This is a very real threat that is only just starting to get looked at. And it goes beyond. If I can do that type of damage to an organization the size of Tesla, couldn't I manipulate entire markets? What about the economies of small countries? This is a very real threat, and it's something that we need to be concerned with. So, I think Morpheus says it best when he talks about how do we define real? Well, real is defined by what we perceive with our own eyes and ears and our various senses. So when we can't trust those senses, how do we discern what is real? How do we even define it? Because honestly, we've lost that capability. And this is the attack vector that exists right now as we see the world today, thanks to the introduction of deep fakes. Now, how good have they gotten? Hopefully this video will play and I'll show you.
I'm Jim Meskimen, and I wrote a poem about what it feels like to be an impressionist. Is anything more sad and lame, contemptible, beneath disdain,
in short, provoking of disgust, than being an impressionist?
a third-rate, even fourth-rate skill? The definition of cheap thrill. Like watching farm equipment rust is watching an impressionist. relic from a distant day that long since should have died away. Dishonorably mentioned is the pitiful impressionist.
Weird and slightly ostentatious tired debris.
So that
Las
video
Vegas.
is actually
Whose
about
former fans
9
are
months
dismissed.
old right now.
Allegiance to
And the tag, you can
impressionists.
see how impressive that is. If you're not paying attention,
opportunities
those facial
passed
changes
up
happen very
and
subtly
wasted
and very
because he's
convincingly.
hellbound
If you
to
walked in
follow
on
the
any one
lust,
of those still
pity
frames,
the poor
you would probably look at it
impressionist.
and not realize that that was a face placed on another person's body. You might recognize the face as a particular actor and realize something isn't quite right here. And this is how impressive this tech is getting, and it's improving at a crazy rate. When we think about the fact that this tech started in 2017, and this is where we're at as of 8 months ago. So how are we producing this? How are deepfakes created? Let's walk through this. Now, I could teach a masterclass just on how to do this, and I obviously don't have that kind of time. So I'm going to run you through this process pretty quickly. But ultimately, the creation of deepfakes leverages what we call GANs. So GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Network. And if I break that down, it's self-explanatory. Generative because we're creating something. Adversarial because I have these two neural networks within it that are competing with each other. So I've got the generator, which, as you can see here, is responsible for generating the media. I also have this idea of a discriminator. The discriminator network is responsible for looking at the generated media and determining how realistic is it, how acceptable is that result. So we train both of these with still images that represent, in this case I showed the subject, the one that we're trying to insert, which is Barack Obama, but actually it would be both sides of the equation. It would be also the target that we're trying to replace. The generator creates the images from literally frame by frame from the video, and the discriminator looks at each of those frames and says either yes, that's real, or no, that's fake. So this is the general concept, but I'm going to break it down for you a little bit more to give you a little more context in how this works. So when I look at how these neural networks are going to generate this, how they learn, and this is kind of that training that you'll hear about in deep learning in general. First thing we have to do is we have to do what we call extraction, which is we're going to pull out of all that training material the exact facial region that we want to capture, and we're going to resize it to a standard size. So you'll see 64 by 64 pixel, all the way up to 384 by 384, and sizes in between, and now they're even going beyond 384. I think I've seen, there was something along 512 was out there, and I think a few others. But so we standardize these images, and then that's so that this encoder can take those images and attempt to create a mathematical model that describes all the aspects of the face. So you think about the traditional 68 facial recognition landmarks. Those are going to be a part of that. The facial alignment, shades, colors, all of the things that you need in order to recreate a face are encoded into a mathematical model. We then feed that mathematical model to the decoder, and what the decoder is going to try to do is recreate that original image based only on that mathematical model. So it's basically testing how good is that model. We then pass those images to the discriminator, which compares the generated image to the original and determines, okay, how acceptable is this? And it calculates this thing we call loss. And loss is just a numeric value that represents how good or bad the end result was. The discriminator then updates within that mathematical model these things we call weights. And the weights are what actually manipulate how that model functions, so that the next time the decoder uses it, it can adjust appropriately. So this is that loop that's constantly happening in the training process, where we've got the discriminator feeding back to the generator, so the generator is consistently improving. So when I'm going to do training to do a deepfake, this is what it looks like. So you see up top, I've got my image, and below me I've got Alyssa Milano's image. I feed both of those to the same encoder, because what I'm trying to do is get that encoder to create a mathematical algorithm that is capable of producing either of our faces. Then I have two decoders, one for me, one for Alyssa Milano. that generate those faces based off that mathematical model. And I do this over and over again. I constantly have the discriminator improving this process by updating weights. And when those loss values and the visual products get to a point that I'm happy with them, my training is complete. Now this can take anywhere from 24 hours to a week or longer, depending on the aspects I'm trying to capture and how I'm handling that training. Once I have that model built and I'm happy with it, now I'm ready to do the convert process, which will actually create the video. So frame by frame, what happens here is we take those video frames, pass it to the encoder, but now I just pass it to encoder B. So I've taken my image, passed it into that model, created the model, now I give it to decoder B, which is the decoder that creates Alyssa Milano, and the end result is what you see here, which is my head, Alyssa Milano's face. And it accounts for all of the facial movements and all the other things. So I mentioned that the tech is getting better though. This is the traditional way to produce deep fakes, but what we're starting to see now is a lot of research where instead of trying to create a model that can just encode one or two faces, researchers are creating models that can encode any face. So they're looking at stylistic patterns of faces, and what they're trying to do is, rather than specifically train a GAN on how to convert one face to another, they're trying to create GANs now that can convert any face to a specific face. And we're seeing really good results from this. It's a little scary because it happens in almost real time now. Because you don't have all of that upfront training, you can create, you'll see there was an article released not too long ago about some research where there's a plugin that's been released for Zoom meetings where you can actually do this in real time in a Zoom meeting. Now the results of it aren't great. There's lots of visual distortions and other things. You can pretty much tell it's a deep fake video. But if we're that far already, it's probably not too far off that you're going to see much more realistic capabilities in the very near future. So this leads us to, how do we start to determine what's real and what's fake? How can I tell what is a deepfake video? How can I detect these? So originally what researchers were able to do was they were able to look at very obvious visual deformations. So I mentioned before how we're taking these still images of a particular person and we're training the AI based off of that and then applying those images to someone else's face. Well, obviously, everybody's got different sized and shaped faces. So early on, you could detect things like if you look near Nicolas Cage's right eye to the left side of the face as we look at it, you can see there's some distortion up near the eye. And that's where that red arrow is pointing. The blue arrow is pointing at some issues in the cheekbone area where shadows are off and they don't make a lot of sense. These are things that researchers were able to detect early on, back say around 2018. But that's changed. And GANs no longer make these kinds of mistakes. They've gotten much better. So then researchers started to look at eye blinking. And what we found initially was that deepfake videos didn't represent eye blinking properly. You would see one blink maybe every 5 minutes or something like that. And so towards the end of 2018, University at Albany released a research paper where they had done studies of deepfake videos and were able to very reliably detect deepfake videos because of the lack of eye blinking. Think about it. How many pictures are there of you on the internet with your eyes closed? Not many. So GANs were having a hard time recreating these images of a blinking face. Now, within 2 months of that research paper being released, we started seeing deepfakes that were more reliably replicating eye blinks. They're still doing some research on this. They're looking at things like the velocity of the eye blink, the directional movement of the eyelids, and things like that that are still able to somewhat detect it. But that capability is consistently reduced as the GANs get better and better at reproducing eye blinking. There's another issue here with warping. So I mentioned we train all of these models based on standard sized images. So we're normalizing all the images that we're training on. And that causes some problems. So on the left side here, you see Steve Buscemi's face on Sharon Stone's body. And in that frame on the left, it looks pretty realistic. Like, this looks believable. Now, unfortunately for the person who created this video, a few moments later in that movie, they zoom in on Sharon Stone's face. And so when the GAN tries to apply that same sized image to now a much larger representation of her face and put Steve Buscemi there in her place, you notice, if you look closely, you can see the differences first in terms of resolution between the facial region and things like her hair. You see these very fine details in her hair, but looking around the eyes and the nose and the lips, you can see lots of blur. That's an obvious issue. Not quite as obvious, but still there as well, as if you look at the cheekbone structure, you can see some very obvious warping and changes and distortions there as well. Again, because of the way it had to take this smaller image and shape it to fit that much larger representation, that larger facial region, because of the zoomed in video. So this helps us as well, but as we're moving into more of this pattern-based, as I mentioned before, where we're no longer trying to map a face to a face, but rather map patterns, we're going to see this continue to become less and less effective. Other researchers are looking at other ways to do this and kind of avoiding a lot of the really artifact-based or distortion-based and actually looking at behaviors. So there's studies being done at Dartmouth around how can we detect behavioral changes that don't fit the context of the material being delivered. So you see here on the top row, that's Barack Obama delivering a message that is very tender. He was talking about healthcare, and so you see he's kind of got his eyebrows are raised. He looks very open. The next line there is him delivering a very stern speech. It was something directed at North Korea, and so you can see almost in some of those he looks quite angry. And so researchers have been able to model these behaviors, taking into account the material that's being delivered. And actually from there, they've been able to boast about 95% accuracy rating. They expect by the time the US 2020 election rolls around, that'll be up to 99%. So that's good news, except to be able to do all of that behavioral analytics, it's got to be somebody who is a celebrity. So it doesn't help in the situation of things like revenge porn and other things where the target of that might be just average Joe citizen who probably doesn't have a lot of that information out there, nor are you going to have the time to do that level of analysis on their behaviors. So researchers are also working with the idea of trying to prevent deepfakes altogether. So I mentioned facial recognition before. Part of that process, as I mentioned, is that these deepfakes, these GANs need to leverage facial recognition to find those facial regions and to pull that mapping out. And so what researchers are trying to do is actually attack those facial recognition algorithms themselves. And they're using this thing that we call adversarial perturbations. Basically what this is noise that's introduced into the image, but it's imperceptible to the human eye. However, as you see here, what happens is it completely destroys the facial recognition algorithm. So that first row is the untreated image, and you can see from the green boxes that the facial recognition algorithms are very reliably detecting faces. The second row are the same images treated with this noise, and you can see by doing that there are literally hundreds of faces being detected in these images, and none of them are actually the appropriate face. And that last row then, of course, is the actual noise that these researchers are injecting into those images. This is really effective, and it will even address the latest breaking methods because they still all leverage facial recognition algorithms. The problem is, how are you going to make sure that every picture you ever take of yourself, every video you ever take of yourself is treated with these perturbations? And that's the problem here. It's a great idea, but the realistic capability to be able to leverage this long term is probably fairly limited. So these are a lot of really great technological solutions. But the problem is, when we talk deepfakes, we're talking misinformation. And misinformation isn't a technological problem. It's a human problem. And that's something we need to be very aware of. And any solutions that we consider, while they may include some form of technological answer, we need to make sure that we are addressing that very human problem. Misinformation is something that has been omnipresent in our culture for a long time, a lot longer than most of us even realize. In the last 4 years, it has accelerated to unbelievable degrees. Different think tanks and analytical organizations that look at this and really track the level of misinformation are detecting misinformation at alarming rates. And so we need to understand misinformation and how we combat it. The problem with misinformation is that it's sticky. And what I mean by sticky is once you get it in somebody's head, it is amazingly difficult to dislodge. The reason for this is misinformation is designed, it's propaganda. It's designed to play off of our existing thoughts, our existing beliefs. It leverages our own prejudices. And it basically tells us a story that we already want to believe is true. So what happens is as we perceive this information then, our brains insert that information into what we call a logic tree or a logic chain. And so truths that we know already link into that information that we saw. Our prejudices link into that information that we saw. And trying to break that information out of that logic chain is very difficult because it flows. In the mind of the person who perceived that information, it makes sense. It's logical. It ties together because it fits with all their prejudices, understandings of the world, their beliefs. And that makes it very hard to remove it. So what do? When it comes to debunking misinformation, there's really 3 things we need to be focused on. First and foremost is just putting the warnings out there that this type of information exists. So from a general level, that might be just simply creating awareness that, hey, deepfakes exist. These are really awful things. That by itself doesn't help. It's one step. We then need to reinforce it. When we see specific misinformation, we need to call it out repetitively. Over and over again, we need to share that this is fake information. This is not reality. Now, those 2 steps still aren't sufficient. And if you want an example, I can give you one. Think back, it wasn't even a deep fake, but think back a year and a half ago when somebody took video of Nancy Pelosi at a State of the Union address and they modified that video just by simply slowing it down to make it appear as though she were inebriated. That video surfaced, predictably it got a lot of shares really, really quickly, but really fast the media responded and put the call out there that information was not real. This was a fake video. It was just manipulated to slow it down and to make her appear this way. This was not real. A week after that news broke, the news that this was fake, a week after, we were still seeing millions of shares on right-wing websites that were still touting this as, oh my God, she was drunk at this event. Those efforts didn't break that misinformation out of those people's heads. They still believed it was true. Why? Because we failed in this last part here that you see at the bottom. If I'm going to try to dislodge misinformation from your mind, it's built into that logic chain. So when I present you with that truthful narrative, I need to present that narrative in a way that fits in your logic chain. So that's hard because every one of us has a very different logic chain that causes us to believe that information. But we can analyze that original misinformation and understand what were the motivations, what were the prejudices, what were the beliefs that were being played off of there. And when we try to message a narrative around the truth, we need to present it taking that into account and combating for that. Giving those people a secondary plausible explanation that they can then insert into their logic chain that will fit and does not break their beliefs. It does not conflict with their prejudices. It is consistent with how their mind is seeing the world. That is what we need to do to combat this type of threat. So I've talked a lot about threats. I've made this sound really scary, and perhaps it is. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of good use for this technology, and indeed researchers are looking at this. For my Star Wars fans out there, do I have any Star Wars fans? I'm sure I've got some. See, there we go. I like this VR thing. This is way better than other virtual ones because I can actually see people respond. I should have been doing this all the way along. But yeah, so you guys remember Rogue One, and Grand Moff Tarkin makes an appearance. That guy's been dead for a couple years. A young Princess Leia shows up. How did that happen? That was all done using GANs. It was this same technology that we see being used to do awful things to do some really pretty incredible things. Now, there's obviously some ethical concerns here, and from what I'm seeing so far, it appears that Hollywood might actually be taking those seriously. They are discussing things like having permission or getting permission from the estates of these people, for instance. I know they had permission from the estate of the actor that played Grand Moff Tarkin. So, and I know Carrie Fisher also gave them permission to do it, to use her younger images as well. So that's kind of cool. That's actually exciting to see that we can do some really neat stuff like that. We can bring back characters in movies years later. You also see medical imaging up here. GANs are being used now to analyze MRIs, and what researchers are finding is that these GANs can detect tumors that your best specialists cannot detect looking at these MRIs. Beyond that, not only does the GAN detect those tumors better, it's actually able to predict the growth patterns far more accurately than any doctor. So when we think about treatment processes and how we're going to address which treatments we're even going to leverage and how aggressive we're going to be, GANs are going to allow doctors to be far more accurate in how they go about a treatment plan. Moving to the right then from that, you can actually see another health application that will be expanded with GANs. And that's the research that's being done around augmented reality. So what you see in this image is actually a augmented reality telehealth solution. That doctor that this person is talking to is actually an AI-generated algorithm that's assessing some of their medical information. And that image isn't actually a real person. That's an image that was of a person that was generated completely from scratch. That's not a human being that exists anywhere in the world. Instead, it's an image that's designed to leverage some of the most soothing aspects of facial features. And it constructs an image of a person that is meant to make that patient more comfortable so that they're able to more calmly share what is going on, share the aspects of what they're experiencing, what symptoms they're having, etc. And so it's really designed to disarm the patient and allow them to more easily and accurately convey what it is that they're experiencing to that doctor in a telehealth situation, which that's one of the things that right now doctors are saying they're seeing more than anything else, is that in telehealth situations, patients aren't as willing to be open and honest about what they're experiencing. So this is one of those that could actually help us even in present day with what we're dealing with right now. Finally, if we look in the lower right, This is one you might debate whether this is a good use or not. Personally, I think it's incredibly innovative, and I like the idea. But this was a governor candidate in India. And his constituency, if you know anything about India, we probably have some folks maybe even in here today who may be from that region. They have many, many different dialects that are spoken across the country. There's not just one language spoken in India. This particular candidate had a constituency that represented 12 different languages. And so what he did was he recorded a video address to his constituency and then had it deep-faked where it changed his face and the audio so that he was speaking in the native dialects of all of the different people in his area. It was amazingly well received. They didn't lie. They didn't, he didn't try to hide the fact that this was, a deep-faked video, so it's not like it was dishonest. He put it out there, but the people still loved this. They were seeing their politician connecting with them in a way that politicians had never been able to connect with them before. He could deliver the same consistent message in various different languages and have it be believable, and it connected. He won by a landslide. He's a very popular figure right now. And there is that ethical dilemma here. Like, could this be misused? Of course it could. But I like this usage. I think that something like that can foster a stronger connection between those that are being governed and their politicians ultimately is something that's promising and would be effective in improving politics probably overall. So as I start to wrap up here, I want to leave you with this quote. This quote is from 1984. Yuri Bezmenov was a KGB agent. He was working with the USSR, the then USSR, on their brainwashing campaign, for lack of a better term. That is literally what they were trying to do, both inside their own country and within the United States. This quote goes to the heart of what misinformation is all about. The fact that we're trying to hand people an overabundance of conflicting information such that people stop making sensible conclusions. They stop making decisions that are based in their own self-interest. You look at our entire societal system is based on the presumption that people will make decisions that are in their own best interest. This becomes an attack on those very societal norms and structures. This is why deepfakes need to be understood. This is why we need to be able to appropriately address things in terms of misinformation. And this is why there's hope, because we've done it before, but there's a lot of concern right now about the capabilities of what this media can do. So a couple things I want to share with you. The slides are available on slides.com. They're out there publicly, so you can grab this entire slide deck. But if you want to see some of the research that I've been doing, as you saw before, I've actually been generating my own deepfake videos, and I've got another round of that I'm about to kick off here soon. You can follow this hashtag on either LinkedIn or Twitter, and I've got links there that would actually take you to that. You can also see an example of the final video that I was able to generate of me with Alyssa Miller. What you'll see there is you'll see actually some examples of how good it can be. You'll also see some examples of a lot of the struggles and the challenges that still exist in creating good deepfake videos. So I encourage you to check those out. I'll also share with you, these are references to all of the various research articles that I've leveraged and presented in this talk today. The one at the bottom is the most recent one. That is the one that talks about how researchers are now trying to map facial patterns across multiple targets and be able to create these subject videos. So I definitely encourage you to check these out. There's a lot of great information there. So please go take a look at those. And then finally, I encourage you to continue the conversation with me. My Twitter handle is there for you. Please feel free, go ahead. My DMs are open. I try to keep my DMs open all the time, despite what that means in terms of some garbage I have to deal with. But I like to have these conversations with folks. This is what I do as a security advocate every day. I go out and I interact with people. I want to hear your ideas, your thoughts, share my own, challenge each other, see what we can do together to make the world a better place. You also see my LinkedIn. If you're more comfortable with LinkedIn, feel free to message me there, connect with me. Always happy to accept connections. And then finally, a link to my blog, alyssasec.com. I encourage you to come check it out. I'll admit I haven't been as active recently since the COVID stuff hit, but I do blog out there from time to time. It's where I put my speaking engagements that I apologize currently aren't up to date since we went virtual either. I will fix that soon, I promise. But definitely would love to talk with you folks more. So with that, on behalf of everybody here at InfoSec OASIS, my employer, and obviously myself, thank you so much. This has been probably the coolest experience I've had in a long time delivering this message up here in this environment. So thank you to Kano and the Rapture for everything you guys have done to put this together. If it goes as successfully as this first one did, this is going to be an amazing conference. So thank you so much. And with that, we've got time. We can open this up to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great talk. This is such a cool thing. I'm so glad that we were able to make this all work. Amazing job. So we've got several questions. We'll try to take as many as we can. The first one is from Ryan. So Ryan, I'm going to give you access to a megaphone and on air. So everybody now can see and hear you as soon as you go off mute. So you should have the option to unmute now and you can ask your question. All right, so that was declined. If you have another question, Ryan, please just ask again, or raise your hand again. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss that question for now. Next question is from Brad. Brad, we're going to go ahead and put you on air and give you access. Brad, you should be good to ask a question when you're ready. All right, what we're going to do is, it sounds like maybe a bunch of people accidentally clicked the raise hand in place of the clap emoji. So I'm going to go ahead and dismiss all questions. If you do have a question, then go ahead and raise your hand again in just a second here. One second while I clear the list, and then we'll let people raise hands. All right, the list has now been cleared. If you have a question, go ahead and click that raise hand button, and we'll let you ask questions. There we go. All right, first up is David El Fuerte. David, you are on air, and you should have access to speak.
All right, great. Alyssa, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks for the talk. Quick question. So I know in order to combat this, there's different ways, and you mentioned one of them. Is there any thought of having a browser plugin that actually helps detect this for people?
So I don't know that anyone's doing a browser plugin yet. What I can tell you is some of the social media outlets are making some efforts. Facebook in particular has partnered up with a number of different educational institutions with a challenge for them to create detection algorithms and so forth, so that they, presumably, I would assume they're going to do something similar to what they're doing with fake news now, where they label it. One of the challenges being with this media, there's some gray area as to whether, where that line of free speech and satire is. So Facebook hasn't said for sure yet how they're going to handle it with these algorithms that are being generated, but that's what the speculation right now is, that that's how they're going to handle it. It would make sense, certainly at a higher level, to do it at a browser level as a whole. I'd love to see Google and Mozilla get in and start doing that work, but I have not heard that that's something they're looking at currently.
Great, thank you. Okay, we should have time for a few more questions here. The next question will turn over to Michael. Michael, you are on air, sir.
Can you hear me?
You
Yep.
can.
Excellent. What do you think the next paradigm in this technology will be if you were to try to predict the future?
So it depends on what you mean by paradigm. I guess, right now I think the kind of the holy grail that everyone seems to be chasing as far as the technology is to really improve it and get it to real time. So as we see compute getting stronger and faster and cheaper, it's going to continue to enable these improvements at astonishing rates. I think you are starting to see, from a media perspective, they're really delving into where does it fit in terms of overall policy making. And so I think you're going to start to see more of that becoming a topic outside of just the political arena. So, as far as deepfake moving beyond video into other things, obviously where we're all sitting here today in AltSpace VR, it would not shock me if in a year or two, especially with the improvements in compute and cloud technologies, that we could be sitting here, 2 years from now, looking at real faces of everybody that's in this room.
Awesome, thank you. We have time for one more question. So the next question is from Raymond. Raymond, you should be on air.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Raymond.
Hello. Okay. Based on social engineering topics, we can learn how to use fake impression like smile, fake voice, etc. So, is it possible to bypass lie detector test to counter the victim, which is holder the lie detector test?
So, from a lie detector perspective, that would be tricky for a few reasons. One, you would have to have a way to actually convincingly, and now you're talking about two people physically in a room together. So a lot of that, it would be hard to actually present that audio in a convincing way. What they are worried about with some of that audio is there are still areas where people are using audio authentication. So that's going to be an issue, and that's something that people are having to look at. On the flip side, what it is doing is it's going to create a stronger focus on having to rely on verification steps beyond just the person we're talking to. As awareness of this grows, so we think about things like what hackers are doing, or attackers rather, are doing with SIM jacking, where they're actually contacting the wireless companies and getting EMIE numbers changed and whatnot. We're going to see, I think, as this becomes more apparent, organizations like that are going to realize they have to be better. People in general are going to become more aware that this is something that they have to account for, and we can't just rely on voices, we can't just rely on video evidence. Basically, it is completely elevated the level of acceptability for evidence of just about anything.
Awesome. Thank you for the great questions, and thank you, Alyssa, for speaking. One last time, can we get some emoji hearts and claps? Very cool. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is we will unmute the room as we get ready for the next round of talks. So up next in the fountain, we have David Kennedy and we have McLovin in the palms. David's talk is developing adversary capabilities, and McLovin's talk is defending the Vatican, in quotes, in Minecraft.